في صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم إني أبرأ إليك من كل حول وقوة وألجأ لحولك وقوتك يا أرحم الراحمين. My dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the beginning of this session to shower all His mercy and tranquility and to purify and rectify our intentions. My brothers and sisters, in today's session we continue the story of Hadith. In the previous session we elaborated the meaning of Hadith and the meaning of the Sunnah, and we just reviewed a bird's eye view on the authority of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. In today's session, we continue discussing issues related to the story of Mustalah al-Hadith, or the Hadith in general, by talking about the issue of documentation of Hadith, the development of ancillary branches of Hadith, biographies of Hadith narrators, accreditation and attunement of Hadith narrators, or what is commonly known as al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, and the emergence of Hadith literature. The references we referred actually to Hashim Kamali textbook on those pages, and Zubayr Siddiqui Hadith literature, and I think you have access to those. I think you have access to those references, inshallah. Documentation of Hadith. When was the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ documented? This is a very critical issue because it was raised in the context of talking about the preservation of the Sunnah. And many Muslims even rush into concluding that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has been documented at an early stage of the history of Islam, even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they expand their expectation to say that the Sunnah has been documented in a large scale even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And others say that the Sunnah hasn't been documented. Still, there is a third group who took a moderate path by saying that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has been documented, but it's on a limited scale during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Ummah relied intensively on oral tradition or on oral transmission of the Hadith. So we have two basic views. The Sunnah was documented or the Sunnah was not documented. Those who advocate the concept that the Sunnah has been documented at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they refer, or those who claim that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was not documented at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they refer to the hadith, which is, it's an authentic hadith reported in Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تكتبوا عني غير القرآن لا تكتبوا عني ومن كتب عني غير القرآن فليمحه وحدثوا عني ولا حرج ومن كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. Don't write what I say. Anyone who has written from me anything other than the Quran, let him blot it out. You may speak about me, there is no objection to that, but one who attributes a lie to me deliberately should prepare himself for a place in hell. They further maintain that we don't have access to existing compilations of the early period at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and at the time of the Sahaba. May anybody actually answer back by saying, but the Muslims at that time, how should we have an existing compilations? I tell you, no, we have some existing documents, the manuscripts of the early manuscripts of the Quran, which were written at the time of the Umayyad period. And there are so many manuscripts now which have been subjected to radiocarbon, and it was proved to be written in the first or even in the beginning of the second Islamic century. 5 or 6 even prominent manuscripts like Britain Library 2165, Tippingen manuscript, Paris 3281 through to 8 A, B, C, D, E. I'm talking about certain manuscripts which are now existing in the West, and most of them, they have been attributed to this period. So we don't have existing completions of the early period, and this is true. We don't have existing completions of the period of the Prophet which include a hadith. They also say that Umar ibn Mas'ud, Zubayr ibn Awan, Thabit, Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri were all against writing down hadith. They have recorded certain statements of those Sahaba who were against the writing of hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those scholars came up to the conclusion that hadith were not written at the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But on the other side, those who, the opponents, the proponents, those who go on the other side to propose and support the idea that the hadith was written at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, those are the proponents of writing down Sunnah in the time of the Prophet. They say, no, the Prophet ﷺ later encouraged removing literacy. And the Messenger ﷺ, he allowed the Sahaba later to write down the Sunnah in the authentic hadith, which was also recorded by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, and it has been proved to be authentic hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ said, I have previously prohibited you of writing down hadith, so now you can write it down. You can write it down. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged removing illiteracy, and Muhammad Mustalah al-A'zami, in his very, very well-known book, Hadith Literature, he recorded that the Sahaba at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they had over 16 schools in 16 different mosques in Medina, which were interested basically to remove illiteracy from people and to encourage them how to read and write. So at the end of the Medinian period, the Prophet and the Sahaba at least, they could write and read and move to a second stage, to another stage of preserving their literacy, preserving their legacy in a written form. Moreover, the prohibition of writing was initially originated to prevent confusion between the holy text and the words of the Prophet ﷺ, the text of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. But later, when this was safe and the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ could easily understand the text and discern between the Quran and the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ allowed them. An evidence for the prohibition that was abrogated is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, may Allah be pleased with him. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he went to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam and said to him, Ya Rasulullah, I used to write down your ahadith, so the people of Quraysh wanted me and they said, you write down everything that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam says or he pronounces, and he is a human who can speak a time of anger and also a time of anger and at his time of release. So the Prophet ﷺ commanded him in a very eloquent statement. He said, Uktub, write down. For wallahi, by Allah, nothing comes from this mouth except the truth. Also, this impression, the existence of numerous sahifas written down during the Prophet time. We had so many sahifas, like a sahifa al-Sadiqa, which was written in the first time of Hijrah. This is the sahifa of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, which has been reported by his grandson, Amr ibn Shu'aib, عن أبيه عن جده عمرو ibn Shu'aib. He reported the Sahifa of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. We had also the Sahifa of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, which was written by Hammam ibn Munabbih. Hammam ibn Munabbih is the student of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. We had also a written Sahifa which is attributed to Sa'd ibn Ubadah. This is attested by Tirmidhi and Bukhari. We have also the Sahifa of Samurat ibn Jundub, who died in 60 after Hijrah, who wrote a hadith which were later inherited by his son Sulaiman. We had also the Sahifa of Jabir ibn Abdullah, the Sahifa of Al-Sadiq of Abdullah ibn Amr that I have referred. We had the Constitution of Medina. We had a Sahifa which is attributed also to Abdullah ibn Abbas. We had a Sahifa which is attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib, in which he recorded the exact amount of the zakatable money, zakatable wealth, and the amounts which should be extracted and who should receive. This is, and all of those Sahifas has been preserved for us in the larger anthologies of Hadith. So, in conclusion, my brothers and sisters, I need to confirm about a few things. The first point is writing down the hadith at the time of the Prophet ﷺ cannot be linked to the conclusion that it is necessary to preserve the hadith, that should be recommended, it should be documented. Documentation of hadith is not necessary, is not a prerequisite for believing that hadith has been preserved. Why? Because hadith, the preservation of hadith does not necessarily rely on writing alone, especially at their time, because at their time, relying on memory was more effective than relying on documentation. Simply because the spelling at the time had some deficiency and it was not that complete. We know that they don't have the dot system on the letters. It was not possible for them to write because they invented paper. They discovered paper in the Abbasid period. So it is almost in the second, third Islamic century when they invaded actually China, and they started to import paper from there. So to write down on vellum or skin, in animal skin, is so expensive. So they restricted these writings only to the Masahif at the first and the second Islamic century. Number two, number one is documentation of hadith is not a condition for the preservation of hadith. Hadith has been preserved at the beginning on its own or as an oral transmission, and this was very effective, especially with the limitations of the spelling system and the writing materials and tools necessary for introducing those huge amounts of hadith into writing. We need to admit that a limited number of hadith were written during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ or immediately after his death. But the official documentation started at the time of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz and Al-Imam al-Zuhri, who died in 124. I mean official documentation. It is documentation which is sponsored by the state, and it exerted huge amounts of efforts and people dedicated for collecting hadith and writing them
or introducing them into writing. This is regarded, and Imam al-Zuhri is regarded as the first compiler of a systematic collection of hadith. An attempt to transfer, there is this official documentation of hadith and what precedes it from the efforts of the Prophet ﷺ to preserve the Sunnah and to preserve his hadith was actually the Messenger and his Sahaba could manage to transfer the Ummah from an Ummah which intensively relied on orally transmitting its legacy through just the oral memorization. You know, the Arabs, they used to memorize their poetry, their stories, etc., into an ummah which was able to transmit and write down its legacy and transfer to the whole ummah. And this is the reason that we have so many attempts or so many compilations of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second topic in today's session is on the development of ancillary sciences for the preservation of hadith. My brothers and sisters, by the development in the by writing down the hadith, and before writing down hadith, the ummah started to use the isnad system. Isnad is the chain of transmission. According to the authentic view, Isnad has been initiated after the death of Uthman ibn Affan on the 36th year of the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because by the assassination of Uthman, the Ummah started to split into Shia and into Bakriya and into Khawarij, so into different sects, and people were afraid of forgery in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So the first thing that they reflected with to cover this problem was basically the invention of the tool or the mechanism of isnad. And isnad is attributing something to its authority. So the people, since the time of the death of Uthman ibn Affan, stopped to receive or to deliver anything without giving a full chain of authorities of those who received it, and they attribute it all the way back to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was their this was the regular practice, and there is a report in the introduction of Imam Muslim's to his Sahih, in which he reported Ibn Abbas and one of his companions who used to report the ahadith. So Ibn Abbas paid no attention to him. So the man started to say to Ibn Abbas, Ya Ibn Abbas, why don't you pay any heed to me, or you give me any attention, though I'm reporting to you a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he said, Ya ibn akhi, the name of that man is Bashir al-Adawi. The name of that man is Bashir al-Adawi. He said, Ya Bashir al-Adawi, we used, when we hear the man saying, we hear the Prophet ﷺ saying such and such, once we just come to the name of the Prophet ﷺ, we pay all attention to him. But when people took all past possible, which means that the people started to be involved in strives, in civil wars, and in arguments, we only talk from people what we know. So we look at the people of a Sunnah and we take their ahadith. And we look at the people of Ahlul Bid'ah, so we neglect their ahadith. So Abdullah ibn Abbas initiated the chronology or the earliest use of isnad. Also, Muhammad ibn Sirin has been reported as saying كانوا لا يسألوننا عن الإسناد. They didn't used to ask about the chain of transmissions until when the fitna occurred. Once the fitna occurred, they started to say, introduce for us your men. Introduce for us your men. And he refers here to the chains of transmissions. So they look at the man and they don't accept his testimony. Alhamdulillah. They don't accept his transmission and they don't receive his reports except when this man introduced for them the chain of transmission. Alhamdulillah.
يرحمكم الله.
يهديكم الله ويصلح بالكم. So Muhammad ibn Sirin passed away in 110, which means that the original Isnad started earlier before Muhammad ibn Sirin. So the scholars started to report the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ by using the isnads or the chain of transmissions. And isnad became a part of religion according to Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Isnad, my brothers and sisters, is unique for the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ, and it is not used by the Jews and Christians before them in transmitting their books. This is the reason that they had so many interpolations and changes. This testimony has been proved by Imam Ibn Hazm, may Allah be pleased with him. So the first contribution that the Ummah made for Hadith is transferring their attention from just reporting their legacy in an oral tradition to writing and documentation. The second contribution was the introduction of the system of Isnad, so that they know who and what are the affairs of the people who transmitted this Isnad. By introducing Isnad, which included a number of narrators, the scholars were in need to trace the history and the biographies of those narrators. So they started to write down dictionaries on a limited and on a wide scale, which included names of narrators, identifying their names, writing down their dates of birth and death, knowing their affairs, criticizing them sometimes to show who is acceptable and who is not. The first person to write on this topic was Aban ibn Uthman, Aban, the son of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who died in 86 after Hijrah, and then Urwa ibn Zubayr, the well-known historian. They started to write about biographical dictionaries, or what is commonly known as Asma'ur Rijal. Even the scholars developed it later to become, and they used it in huge anthologies. I think some of you heard about the book of At-Tabaqat by Imam Ibn Sa'd, the well-known historian. Ibn Sa'd made a big transition and a big stride. He made a big stride in developing writing on historical events by actually classifying the people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and immediately after him into classes, including the Sahaba and including the Tabi'een, including even the Tabi'een. He classified the Sahaba in 3 classes and the Tabi'een into the senior Tabi'un, junior Tabi'un, and the medium Tabi'un. And then he further classified Tabi'in, those who of the 3rd generation, and he gave them also classes which were, and those classes have been actually reflected in the biographical dictionaries of narrators. So the scholars in conclusion used those classes even in writing on other topics. Like they started to write on the classes of the jurists, the classes of the usulis, the classes of the muhaddithin, etc. So the third contribution was writing on biographical dictionaries. The fourth contribution was actually the development of a highly advanced science to criticize the narrators. This is a general critical appraisal of the reliability of the narrators, which was based on knowledge of their life and character, as an aid to determining the veracity of hadith reports. And this was customary before the period when the isnad became long enough to admit the application of the chronological method. So the scholars started to write on the criticism of Rijal, and one of those books, as I mentioned to you, is Tabaqat al-Nisad, and also the Tarikh al-Kabir by Al-Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. And there is another, so Al-Imam al-Bukhari, for example, my brothers and sisters, he wrote 3 books. By the way, he wrote the largest of these is Al-Tarikh al-Kabir, or the Great History, and it is said to have contained the biographical notices of more than 40,000 narrators. Some people, they think that Imam Bukhari was just famous of his Sahih, but Al-Imam al-Bukhari is one of the critics of Hadith, the critics of in Asma and Jarh wa Ta'dil, with a great name in that field. And also he wrote Al-Tarikh al-Awsat and Al-Tarikh al-Saghir. So he had 3 books, 3 big volumes on Al-Tarikh, which basically relates to the history of the scholars of Hadith, which were common at his time and even before him. And this was a main reference for the people. There is also Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil by Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi, and this is a very important book in the field. He followed the example of Al-Bukhari in his At-Tarikh, in including all the narrators known to him together with such significant information as he could acquire concerning their capacities in hadith, followed by his own verdict on each individual. So he provided the history of each name, in addition to giving the date of birth and the date of death, who is his teachers and who his students, and he further at the end added by putting his own judgment on the book, on the person under discussion. There were also further works. Muslim scholars have also wrote voluminous books on particular classes of narrators, such as dictionaries on weak or reliable narrators only. And they also wrote voluminous books on narrators and figures who lived in certain territories, such as Baghdad and Damascus. It's classified according to the territory. So we have the Tarikh al-Baghdad and Tarikh ibn Asa ibn Dimashq, Tarikh Dimashq by Ibn Asakir, etc. And afterwards also emerged the ilm of Mustalah al-Hadith, and ilm Mustalah al-Hadith that we will focus on today's session in this semester, inshallah. And this ilm, or this science, basically discusses hadith terminology and transmission. Ilm Mustalah al-Hadith is very important to know its goal, to fully have a good idea before delving into it. Ilm Mustalah al-Hadith, my brothers and sisters, its main concern is to provide us with rules which govern the process of transmitting and communicating hadith. This is the first goal of hadith terminology, or Mustalah al-Hadith. Number 1, it provides us with the mechanism of how the generation before us transmitted and communicated hadith. The past, they used the methods that they had exploited, the qualifications and requirements, the classifications, the terminology that they used. All of those things are concerned with hadith terminology and transmission. It also elaborates on terminology and hadith classification. So we will, inshallah, in our course, discuss the different criteria of classifying hadith according to authenticity, according to authority, according to the number of narrators, and according to the types of weakness included in this hadith. So it basically talks about terminology. What is the meaning of sahih? What is the meaning of da'if? What is the meaning of hasan? What is the meaning of thiqah, thabt, when we describe a specific narrator or reporter? But also the third goal of hadith terminology is to, and this is the primary cause of the ilm, is to discriminate the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ from others' sayings. So it is basically focuses on how to discern the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ and purify them from any forged or weak ahadith. Who is the first to write on this science? The first one was Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah in his very well-known book Al-Risala. Though Al-Risala was actually a message or a kind of a letter that he sent to Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi in response to his questions about the authority of the Sunnah and the methodology that Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i adopted in eliciting legal rulings in his fiqh. So Imam Shafi'i elaborated the authority of the Sunnah, the significance of relying on the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and he further gave elaborate discussions on the qualifications of the hadith narrators, how to narrate the ahadith, etc. So the scholar said that the first to write on the science in its rudimentary writings was actually Imam al-Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. There were other treatises and other works which came after Imam al-Shafi'i. So the first one to write on Mustalah al-Hadith is Al-Imam al-Rahawan, and his very well known المحدث الفاصل بين الراوي والواعي. المحدث الفاصل بين الراوي والواعي. The criterion between al-Rawi, the narrator, and al-Wa'i, the one who comprehends the text. So Al-Imam al-Rahawan elaborated the different criteria necessary for judging a hadith, labeling a hadith, and qualifying the hadith narrators. Then Al-Imam al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, the well-known traditionist, he wrote his very well-known book Ma'rifat Ulum al-Hadith, Ma'rifat Ulum al-Hadith, or the branches of hadith. He elaborated separate points and topics on hadith, and those actually topics they were scattered in his book, and they were not organized under certain chapters or common topics, but he just dispensed them, spread them through his book. And actually there are two ways of writing on Mustalah al-Hadith. The first way is to write on scattered topics or in a classification, which is in a more systematic way. Like Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi and Al-Rahawan, they follow the basic method of just listing all the necessary information, the topics, the branches of Ulum al-Hadith as they call. Then Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi produced two prominent works. One on the regulations governing the process of Hadith transmission that he called Al-Kifaya fi Ilm al-Riwaya, and the other on the etiquettes and pedagogies of Hadith studies known as Al-Jami' li-Adab al-Rawi was-Sami'. Al-Jami' li-Adab al-Rawi was-Sami'. Upon the so Al-Imam, after Al-Imam al-Rahawan and Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi and Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, came the writings of other scholars, and on the top of them is the very well-known book of Abu Amr ibn Salah al-Shahrazuri. Ibn Salah is known for his very important book, which was epoch-making. This book was is called Ulum al-Hadith or Muqaddimat ibn Salah, the Muqaddimah, the introductory notes of Ibn Salah, or the Science of Hadith by Ibn Salah. And after Ibn Salah came most of the scholars who wrote about this ilm, either taking from Ibn Salah, summarizing his book, elaborating on his book, like for example Taqrib al-Nawawi, Taqrib للإمام النووي, and As-Suyuti, who wrote a voluminous poem on that book of Ibn Salah, and also Al-Iraqi, who wrote also a 1,000 verse poem, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who wrote many of his books on the regulations of riwayah or transmission of hadith. So this is basically the some of the treatises which have been used by the scholars at that time. Uh, Before the emergence of ilm mustalah al-hadith, emerged actually the hadith literature. And by hadith literature, we mean the books of hadith which passed through different stages of classification and writing systems. Like, for example, the hadith literature, or the books which were concerned about collecting the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which started actually in the second Islamic century. They varied according to their goals. So some of them have been classified according to the subjects. Others were classified according to the highest authority who reported the hadith, like the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Other books were mixed between hadith and fiqh, like the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Some books included the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in addition to the statements of the second and third Islamic century scholars, like, for example, Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq al-San'ani and Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah. And those are voluminous books which came before Al-Imam al-Bukhari. Some books, like the book of Al-Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim, were restricted basically to talk about the ahadith, the authentic ahadith, and they neglected the weak ahadith or the Hasan ahadith. Some books were concerned about the legal traditions, like the Sunan Abi Dawud or the Sunan works in general. We will, inshallah, elaborate some of them, inshallah, in our coming lecture, which will talk about hadith literature. But basically, my brothers and sisters, if we conclude that the Ummah reflected to the phenomenon of hadith by taking certain steps to preserve it. On the top of that, the Ummah could take the courageous step of introducing its legacy into writing. So the hadith started to be written on a large scale, sponsored by the state at the beginning, and afterwards it's widespread throughout the whole Muslim world. Number two, by the emergence of the isnad system, and this isnad helped a lot of verifying those reports. Following isnad, the scholars were in need to elaborate the biographical dictionaries of those involved in the chain of transmission, in addition to subjecting them to severe and very meticulous criticism, which led to the emergence of ilm al-jarh wa ta'dil, and afterwards to govern the terminology and the classification and the whole process of riwayah. The scholars were in need to record that in ilm mustalah al-hadith, or the science which is concerned about the classification and the terminology used by the hadith scholars. And finally, it emerged with it resulted in huge hadith anthologies that we will discuss, inshallah, in our coming session. This is briefly
he was eclipsed by others, or he was just someone who started the tradition?
He is one who started the tradition, but he did not actually wrote voluminously about it. Yani, like, for example, Aban ibn Uthman and Urwa ibn Zubayr. Urwa ibn Zubayr had a very great contribution in writing the early history of Islam, and we still have many of his books actually are still extant right now, and the scholars could actually verify many of his reports on the early history of Islam. And Aban ibn Uthman, but Aban ibn Uthman is particularly mentioned as a figure in history in general, and also in initiating the tradition of writing on about the biographies of the hadith narrators. But this actually took big strides on later historians, like for example al-Waqidi and Ibn Ishaq. And after al-Waqidi and Ibn Ishaq came their student. The student of al-Waqidi is Ibn Sa'd, al-Imam Ibn Sa'd, and he wrote his voluminous Tabaqat. And I think that Ibn Sa'd, who made that big stride in providing organized and systematic way of giving names. And if you look at the book of Ibn Sa'd, actually it is a very, very important book in this field, the field of defining the Sahaba, biographies of the Sahaba, biographies of the Tabi'een. Even when you look at any biographical dictionary by the latecomers like Ibn Hajar and other scholars, you will find that they receiving from Ibn Sa'd. Even Al-Imam al-Zahabi in his Tarikh al-Islam, and Ibn Kathir, who came later, centuries after Ibn Sa'd, because Ibn Sa'd lived actually in the third Islamic century. In the third Islamic century. Now, there is another question, which is, what is the difference between the terms sanad and isnad, if there is one? The word sanad, sanad is the name of the chain. This is the chain of transmission. Is the chain of transmission. Isnad is the process of attribution. Isnad is used for two meanings. It is used, number one, as a synonym for sanad, so it's called for the chain of transmission itself, and it's also used to mean the process of attributing hadith to the Prophet ﷺ, or attributing a statement to its author. This ascription or attribution is called isnad. Now, another question referring to the definition provided in your hadith terminology and class. Okay, this is a question. Any further questions?
Sheikh, I read that Al-Rama Hurmuzi critiqued Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Malik. Are you aware of the exact critique he gave? And is there a concept of Jumhur when it comes to Al-Jarh wa-Ta'dil?
No, Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, this is a different methodology when we talk about actually when we talk about the ways of scholars used in Jarh wa Ta'dil. This is each Imam, he had his own methodology of criticizing and also of accrediting certain scholars or certain students of knowledge. These terminologies have been interpreted later. Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi, his book is played a significant role in that field. And I think there is a commentary on this in English, which was written by one of the Orientalists, so one of the Western scholars on Ibn Abi Hatim, and this is a magnificent piece of writing. I wish actually that I can share it with you, and I have it, I think. And it elaborates in detail the methodology of Ibn Abi Hatim. Later, these terms which were used by those scholars and their approaches and their differences have been reconciled and reformed and rewritten by later scholars, especially Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Because Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani wrote many voluminous books on the criticism of Rijal. Al-Imam al-Zahabi, Al-Imam al-Mizzi, Al-Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, they were three of the latecomers who had great impact on the science. So they could actually define and they collected those statements of the early scholars, and they could make a grading system. And this grading system was consists of 10 grades. Some of them, what you can call jarh or impugnment, and the rest were actually ta'dil or accreditation. Like for example, when a scholar uses the word in the superlative, like awthaqun nas, and then comes when he expresses two words together like ثقة ثبت, and then we just give him one quality, and then يعني, so they had a grading system that we will inshallah study later inshallah.
Sheikh, you mentioned that there's different approaches to these topics. Is there a particular approach that we're going to take in this course? Like, so are we going to take a particular, like, favor the mutaqaddimin over the mutaakhirin, or the opinions of Ibn Salah or Ibn Hajar? Is there a particular methodology that you would recommend?
We will actually make a balance. Basically, we will stop at when there is a disagreement among scholars in certain issues, we will definitely elaborate it inshallah, and provide our premises. Why did we choose for this? Like for example, in the topic of acting upon the weak hadith. Generally, we can say that we adopt in broader sense, the methodology of Ibn Salah and Ibn Hajar, actually, Ibn Hajar Asqalani. This is the latest establishment of the science, which was practiced among the latecomers, and it definitely relied on the early scholars of hadith. The gap is not that big. The gap with regard to hadith sciences is not that big, but there are certain controversial issues. When we elaborate those controversies or those issues, we will elaborate them honestly, all approaches, and then we will establish which one. Because actually in Mustalah Hadith, you cannot adopt what you can call a madhab in this case. Yes, some people, they adopted the mutaqaddimin, and others they adopted the mutaakhirin. By mutaakhirin, we refer actually to Sheikh al-Albani and to others who had a methodology in authenticating the hadith. In this case, we will, if there is a gap between them, we will try to elaborate it, inshallah, honestly, to provide which is the preferred one. But I do not adopt one method, whether the mutaqaddimin or akhirin. I try to elaborate them all, inshallah. Okay. Jazakumullahu khairan, my brothers and sisters. We'll stop inshallah at this point. And if you have any further queries or questions, inshallah, you can share with us. I was suggesting for Brother Muhammad, I will suggest for him a mechanism of how to send, inshallah, questions in this case. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your time and bless your efforts. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh.